Good evening, everyone. It is a pleasure to be here with Eduardo and Javier to talk a little bit about renewable energy. The panels were inverted for due to a problem. I think there was a misconnection over there. As we heard, it was very difficult. This day was very difficult for the years and what's going to happen in the future. Collaboration was a word that was widely used, and this represents a big challenge. So I'm going to do a quick introduction. So the transition for the low carbon requires the effort for companies, governments, companies, and societies. In that sense, the corporate world has developed their strategies for neutrality climate neutrality so that they can reduce significantly their greenhouse emission gases. So in Latin America, we have an emission of 1.6, and the world is about 185, which is what they showed. But Latin America is around 18% below the world average and about 10% of China. And it's still a big challenge for them. So the industry is an essential role in this day. And today's action will show the pace of transformation towards the next decades. So we know that we'll be needing an implementation and development at a scale of technologies that will contribute for low carbon emissions. A lot of renewable energies play a key role, and that was also said in a different panel. So a large part of the efforts are focused on decarbonization that will have an implementation of wind energy and solar energy sources, the materials of iron, aluminum, and plastic, and also the increase of bioenergy in the sector, in the transportation sector. The steel sector and hydrogen also come up as fuels, fossil fuels with alternatives. Steel plays a key role in the renovation and transformation for a low carbon technology. It is a vital material for the generation of wind energy and solar energy for electric equipment for also low carbon issuance. According to Bloomberg, we estimate that it will be needed to grow about 50 gigawatts of wind energy a year. And in order for this scenario to be ideal in terms of decarbonization. So we still need to grow significantly for the next years to come. So in Latin America, those natural assets have everything to become the future's global opportunity that also besides the renewable energy makes an important point for our survival. So we have gotten lots of progress in order to guarantee this greatly highlighted place, but we still need to face some challenges. So we can quote Brazil as a pioneer in terms of competitive renewable energy, where we have different levels of competence, and this competence caused the drop of prices, average prices for wind and solar energy, positioning Brazil as one of the most important places in the future of green energies. Chile, in turn, established a goal of having 20% of their energy created by renewable sources by 2025, and currently this goes over 25%. Its geographical localization is one of the most favored for the creation of energy and also to have competitive prices. However, in Latin America, just like everywhere else, they create an ability to transmit and a skill or an ability for local economies, and the economic stability has been really affected by investment. For we are optimistic because we believe in the environmental goals and the potential of the region. We see that the fundamental role is the economy through low carbon emissions, making steel products through good energy sources. And to talk about that, we have our panel. I don't know if we could start, please, with Eduardo. So let's talk about this first, and I would like to thank Alacero for the opportunity to be here, and also it brings me back a little bit to my childhood. My father was involved in this sector all his life, so you are a part of my whole life, my youth, and actually those who are sponsoring the event. I'm actually thankful for the opportunity to be here. So we are going to start. So what we can start with is the NG Group, which is one of the biggest energy companies in the world. It's based in France, and we have operations all over in every continent. In Latin America, NG has a very important representation over there. It creates about 4.2 billion in revenue, Brazil being the most important country, of course, because of its size, but we have Chile, Peru, and Mexico. And in Mexico, we have a network of operations in renewables. 90% of our capacity is installed in Mexico, and it's renewable sources, renewably sourced. So we have about 96%. We still have that 4% in a carbon plant we are investing in. But, well, I mean, I think we don't have my slideshow. It's not running. Or I think it's another presentation. Sorry, I'm sorry I keep talking and talking, but this is not my slideshow. This is Eneo's, oh, it's Eneo's presentation. I cannot speak for him because that's not my company. Yeah, I don't know if we can change the slideshow. As it happens, I will continue talking a little bit, maybe. I'll be mixed, but we have 90%, 96% of our renewable energy at Engie. Oh, thank you. Thank you. So we are reaching, actually, we signed a contract with about carbon, and it will be hydroelectric, solar, and biomass. We're going to skip to offer our clients 100% renewable energy within any package of energy we can offer. I'm going to skip through here, and we'll try to see how through skip to that. We talked about NG Group. We are global, and we have an energy transmission towards part of our plan because it lets us enable the existence of renewable energy. A good part of the country is transmitted and taken to where consumption happens. So consumption is concentrated in the south southwest, and we are going to discuss that. It's a big challenge we have in Brazil, but also at Chile, and those are situations about planning in the sector. We have activities around natural gas as well. We have a gas duct, the northeast and Amazon area, and those are the large systems where we offer gas and the gas transportation that is submerged in those regions. Over here, we have some time, in this decarbonizing path. In 2015, we implemented our strategy that our decentralization and the decarbonization, and that is being executed for the past few years, and it will reach in 2023 with zero emissions in our production chain and the energy supply chain, as I said. So I will leave a vision of reduction to alcance 3, and we are working on our roadmap to net zero within this form of energy is fast and documented. The methodology, as we discussed earlier, is not just a mature methodology. It is constantly changing, and we have been adapting to it so that we can do a pathway that is appropriate within our proposal of being into energetic transition. Because we have our mission with this, we consider ourselves as having been a transition maker. So we are responsible for the energy transition in our clients. Why is that good for value inspiration? We are now going to go to the reality of what we have seen so far. We have characterized that if we don't change our behavior and we don't decrease our emissions, we will do a global collapse. Climate change basically affects the poorest people and the poorest countries in the world in tropical areas with production and a low income. Our problem is a climate and social problem that we need to straighten. And you know, the climate has risks, and we understand that those risks can impose or entail some threats to our companies, and those threats are more and more important. So all of that for the activity and sustainability of the very of the companies themselves. So that's why climate change becomes so important, and that's why we identified that in 79% of the executives at a global level have the important point in their agenda to follow this. And this actually is growing in the face of the executives for sustainable companies. 35% of our executives consider goals within their scorecards. And when we observe, I think it's next one, when we observe the most important point of the ESG is climate change. So reducing emissions for scopes 1 and 2, and we observe the energy matrix. And when we talk about energy, we don't talk about electric. We are talking about the context of energy. It's energy, electric energy, but also fuel energy. And actually, in Latin America, we are well positioned when we compare with the US and Europe. So we're talking about 35.8% of renewables in our energetic metrics, compared with 10 and 20% of the US and Europe and Brazil, the country where I come from. The information is more precise, and we have about 50% of our matrix. When we talk about an electric matrix, the panorama is completely different. We have about 83% of our matrix in Brazil, so it's renewable, whereas 17% is not, and in the rest of the world we have the 73% of fossil base versus the 75 of renewable. So it will certainly be enough for all of the Brazilian and Latin American industry, and it will be of competitive advantage for the unit of carbon in the product they offer. And so, what is going on? Why do we get to have that level of adoption and penetration of renewables? Well, first of all, because we have a cost reduction, it's marginal and it's very significant. Whereas, where we are reaching a certain level of maturity, the level cost of energy in the countries have become in a way that it has been asymptomatic. So we have some limitations on the size of the sample, and that will limit its efficiency in terms of logistics, capacity of the equipment. And so we have some certain limiting elements when we don't have a way to increase the roads to go into the bay, and we cannot reach more efficiency levels. And then we have the offshore. Offshore is another challenge because it has an elevated cost, and it requires a whole structure of ports and ships for support, and a much more expensive maintenance. So we need to remove a turbine to maintain, and we have 5 or 10 kilometers into the coast and the sea. So we have certain difficulties to be able to progress at offshore. We have less limitations in the size of the machines, and they get to 15 to 20 megas, and that is what we see for other parts. And there are some other parts of that elevate the cost of that generation. So when we talk about a review energy transition, we have the climate, we have the risk of investment, negative externality for the increase of emissions, we have the demand, the concerned clients, they are worried about the warming and the awareness of the general population in terms of the need to straighten that climate problem, and general society. So that brings us to every industry, especially our energy industry, with the need of having a position or placing the decarbonization within the strategy at the very heart, and to adapt it to that new reality and decarbonize their supply chain, which would be in our case specific to Brazil Energia in the same step as we are with the diversification of the carbon footprint in the scope 1. So we don't have a way back. It is a trip that started in about 2015 for us, and we are running towards our goals. So as we go, we have new technologies, new emissions, new neutralization technologies, and new emission technologies. So there's a lot of greenwashing. So we need to understand the rules, but also avoid, when talking about it, those rules don't change so that it doesn't look like greenwashing. So we are in an environment where the pieces are constantly moving and the rules keep changing. Those rules change for the industry and the oil industry, and we are going to add very few things. But what we observe from this big challenge is the need, as Georgie talked about, the big, very large capex, so that we can do the modifications where we can reduce the footprint and its transformation from a high furnace to the transformation of steel, green steel production, and also ultimately the substitution for carbon for gas or gas for hydrogen, or even the authentication of green energy, and that demands a lot of capex, and that demand for capex generates a barrier that somehow needs to be straightened by the incentive of investment with governments. So we talked about the Canada incentive that they're giving so that the industry can make a funding and motivate them to carry out that change.
We will have a first stage before we get into different solutions such as hydrogen or other types of electrics. We will have some kind of substitution for coal or carbon for gas, and then we will help the industry in that sense. And of course, we will continue with the coexistence and with the production of steel with different emissions. Now, when we see the opportunity that we have in Latin America, we know that we have natural resources that are abundant. And it's not a secret for anyone. We've heard it from our colleagues. Currently, we have different low cultural elements in comparison to the rest of the world. We are suffering these global fuel crisis much less, and we need to bring industrialization to Latin America, and we need to bring the possibility to start an industry that is led with with hydrogen. So here we can see a great opportunity to establish and create a journey and start this journey even before the global stakeholders. And when we observe what is needed to consider hydrogen, as we already mentioned, in a future journey that is feasible, first of all, we need to work on regulations. Regulations are very important. It's something new, so we're starting to work in some countries at a government level. And we are starting with a regulatory framework to incentivize the use of hydrogen. We need to incentivize and train hydrogen. It's not an easy molecule to use. And also, the molecules that come from hydrogen are not easy to use. So we need to work on regulation, R&D, and with that, we can start working on the different countries. And in 2025, we will need to establish with new trade regulations to have an economic balance that is reasonable for the adoption of hydrogen. And particularly, I believe that this is a journey that will be carried out not only by the energy generators, but it will also require a joint effort from the industry. It will require efforts from the electric generators so that we can find the best solutions. And maybe in the deployment of hydrogen, we will have it in 2025 to 2040, and we will have enough maturity. Maybe we will may have a scale time that makes this situation feasible and to generate hydrogen. As we can perceive here in this journey, it's not going to be overnight. We need to have a long term perspective. We need to have mature technologies. Some of them have already matured, such as the wind and the solar energies, but we are missing a lot to mature the hydrogen technology. The market requires to build the right conditions so that we get to the specific level of evolution that will allow us to have the evolution of the technologies. We understand that this is a journey and we are working together with our clients. Now, the next step is to move forward, to get deeper into the knowledge of the processes of the clients. In the past, we moved and we sold mobilities as an oil and gas industries. We need to get closer to understand the needs of each industry, not only the steel industry, so that we can provide a better supply and we can work with all of you so that we can get to a faster transition and a more efficient transition. There are many opportunities for us to work together, and well, here's our invitation to all of you. Thank you. Now I'm going to need to have my slideshow on the screen. Thank you, Alacero, for giving me the opportunity to be here. I'm going to speak in Spanish. I represent Enel Group, and I'm not going to spend much time by saying who we are, but we are an integrated global utility company. In the entire value chain, we have distribution, renewable generation, thermal generation, and we are having an aggressive plan for the reduction of carbon. And we are working on the energy sector. We have networks, renewables, trading, and with commercialization. So we are a company that has bet for a long time on the renewable energies. Now we are using 54 gigas of capacity, and we have been breaking records in terms of new capacities. And well, without comparing ourselves to other Chinese companies which can have huge amounts of megawatts, but I hope to get 5 gigawatts more this year. And our bet towards decarbonization is very strong. Recently, there was a study that was published, which is we are the company that has reduced the amounts of carbon the most. And well, we've heard a lot of things that have been done today and yesterday in our sessions. And well, with what was mentioned, I would like to focus on the fact that these renewable energies are clearly very resilient in terms of the growth, despite the pandemic, despite the disruptions in the supply chains, despite all of the problems that we've faced. In 20 and 21, we have an installed capacity that is quite high. We came out of a very stable growth annually, but there's a forecast from the International Energy Agency published in May, and I'm sure it's short, but in 2022 we will have between 350 gigas and 400 gigas of installation. As you can see, the wind energy is losing position in comparison to the sun energy that is winning position right now. But when we talk about megawatts, we can identify that there has been an increase in the investment globally, but these 8%, half of this 8% is with the financing costs. You know that the interest rates are impacting a lot, but when we talk about specifically the investment on clean energies and renewable energies, generation, and all these things, we can see that these even growth has changed in trend. And in these last 2 years, we see a strong growth in the investment of green energies and clean energies. But that's not enough. There's a study that was published recently by Bloomberg Finance that calculates what's the investment ratio between the clean technologies investment and the fossil energies investment that will be achieved in 2050, so that we can really get or fight climate change, and so that we can keep the trajectory of 1.5 degrees. So the change in paradigm is brutal. As you can see, we have ratios that have been 0.45, 0.47, 0.50, and there's a change in 2021 in 0.21. So we have seen an investment of the same amount of money in clean energies and fossil technologies, and in 2022 this will be below 1, very close to 1 actually, but in 2030 we will need a ratio 4 times of the investment in clean energies, and this ratio needs to grow. So I have a reference here. You know that there are many calculations about how many gigawatts are necessary, and I have a specific study from the Green Energy Organization, and even though these are different numbers, they speak about many gigawatts that are necessary. And concretely about green hydrogen, the 100 million tons from this study would require 800 gigawatts just for the generation of green hydrogen. If we want to get to the 1.5, we are talking about 10 terabytes or 11 terabytes of installed capacity for 2030. So, as you can see here, the challenge is huge. As we've heard so many times here, I wanted to mention some key elements of what is needed and what is not needed. You can change the red part and put it in negative, and it would go to the green part. If we talk about green and renewable energies, it's going to be helpful to get to our goals and reduce the bottlenecks. Can we change the sense of each one of the senses and do them on the contrary? What is needed? Well, I've gathered 4 main elements. Political commitment. The political commitment needs to create long-term certainty, and this is a very important element when we talk about this type of investments. We know nowadays that the US has the Inflation Reduction Act, we have the Power Eye in Europe, we have good and bad things in both elements. We talked about Canada that has a specific program that is pretty interesting, and well, some people like this company, and well, they might be connecting with them right now, but the focus is being changed. We were fighting climate change as a core concept, and after this crisis we also have the supply security and safety and the industrial part, which is something that we heard yesterday and today, but this is a very important element for the development of renewable technologies. This use of this industry, as we heard in The Economist, gives us a great trend to be able to be self-sufficient in the entire value chain of renewable energies. We have a factory in Sicily for the creation of solar modules specific for Europe. Yesterday we announced the creation of a similar factory in US, and with this political commitment and with this long-term certainty, and whatever this is bringing to us is helping us leverage this to the markets and reduce the dependency that we have in the solar energy for the production in China. So this needs to go together with the regulations and with the market needs. Regulation in terms of permits, not only for their generation but also for their networks. and investment and the commitment with the networks is left aside. But it's very important not only for generation but also for consumption. There needs to be a transition to gas and then to electrification, and then this requires an additional infrastructure which is very relevant in points of consumption. So these two conversations about the networks and the consumption and the permits for infrastructure should go together and not being discussed between the generators and the energy consumptions. And there needs to be a lot of flow in the investment, as in the colleague in Engie said. The generators talk about sustainability, but we also need the technological development because this requires a technological development. And about the negative things that could stop us and hinder us, well, we have the NIMBY, and we have social networks that are amplifying this type of social situation. And sometimes in the sector, in the energy sector and in the industrial sectors, we have a lot of energy consumers and they cannot communicate properly. So we need to work with bigger efforts. We need to be self-critical because sometimes we cannot explain things very well, and this is why we have the greenwashing. And we'd better do instead of just saying, because we might have a negative impact in terms of communication. Now, the permits depend on regulation. There are bottlenecks in many industries, and I'm not going to talk about Mexico. The secretary said in COP27 that the objective is going to be widened to 30%. I'm not clear what's the baseline that we're going to be comparing it with, and we talk about a very relevant number of gigawatts, and I'm willing to see if we are able to accelerate this transition and if we can work with the contribution of the private sector, given the fact that this has been a very difficult situation to operate and to continue with the development of projects, given the uncertainty that we have in the market. As I mentioned before, the network is very important, and there are collateral elements that I mentioned, the critical materials, for example, and this brings a lot of impact. And this generates a new element, which is geopolitics, which has been mentioned before in other panels. But this is a New York Times article that talks about the International Energy Agency, and you can see the need of these materials for the entire energy transition, and this is quantified. Here, if you see where these metals are being manufactured and then where they are processed, the assembly is more related to the process on the bottom part, because mostly it's done in China, and this trend is very related to this. Sometimes there are new projects, there's a lot of force, and they need renewable energies as well. And it's very important to close this cycle, because generating and producing these metals with low emissions is paramount so that we can guarantee that the life cycle of the emissions and the electric transition can follow this 1.5 degree trend. Now, the renewable energies, well, this is important because we've seen a decrease in price. However, now that's not the case. The prices are increasing because the impact of the raw materials and the situation of the supply chain and the markets of different metals such as silica or lithium is evident. So with this increase in the capex and in the costs, the renewable energies keep being competitive in comparison to the prices that we see, for example, with thermal generation, and that's good news. And the competitiveness, of course, is not something absolute, it's compared with something else. And in this case, even with this increase of prices, the renewable technologies keeps being competitive in many markets, and doing this with these renewable energies is much better than having just a combined cycle. and well, the parity sometimes it's different. Now, there are many voices that say that it was like a bluff. Renewable energies was a bluff, but now we have situations with the Russian gas. And with this graph, I would like to ask you something. What would have been the impact if we hadn't had the renewable energy that we have in Europe? There are some entities that are calculating this impact. This is 11 billion article, and here growth in EU electricity generation from wind and solar has avoided this amount, and well, this is thanks to the situation in France. And imagine if we've had more renewables in the market. And now I'm going to wrap up with two more topics. Green hydrogen, we have many projects, and well, I have been working with an Italian steel producing company. We have been combining green hydrogen with natural gas. They have a very ambitious plan to work on a step by step. First natural gas, then green hydrogen, and it's out of the money, but we'll do it little by little. Then electrification, but green hydrogen should not be included in the hype that green hydrogen can be used for anything. We need to work on rationality, on thermodynamics, and whatever can be electrified. And what's more convenient to be electrified, well, this is where we're going to be using green hydrogen. And this is the famous staircase that is from the founder of Bloomberg, Michael Hybrid. And here we have a sector where it makes sense to use green hydrogen because we don't have a better alternative. There are other sectors and other uses for green hydrogen that can be questioned because the electrification might be a better solution. And my last part is greenwashing. There is a recent trend here and a rumor that has been growing, and a lot of papers that have been published talking about how the companies are declaring the consecution of the green objectives. We've seen weird trends where they are establishing the reduction in emissions based on their targets. They don't want to send information. Maybe they're doing, but they're not saying what they're doing. And not all of the tools that are in the market have the same credibility. So in this situation where there are non-mature technologies, we can see a reduction of these emissions. We have PPAs, we have clean energies, we have scope 1 and scope 3, which are a little bit more difficult, but scopes 2 are being questioned. The base target strategy, there are many questions about this and about the decarbonization structure by decreasing what you cannot decarbonize. So this is very important. What you can see on the top right part is a paper questioning some of the actions and reportings from different companies. And on the right side, I recommend this. It's a 25-minute documentary talking about different ways, curious ways of justifying the reduction of emissions using carbon offset. And these are unbelievable, and this is also with names of companies. And the most interesting thing is a paper from two universities, a Canadian and an English university, that analyzes all the base target data since 2015. So this conclusion is that the scope 2 and the justification of the reductions is that many companies are using regs, European warranties or whatever, and they're using these very old elements, a hydroelectrical part. If we took out these regs that are additional to the new renewable energies, then these companies would not be following these 1.5 degrees. That's what it says. And this has created a lot of controversy, and has generated a lot of media controversy. There are work groups working on opening or trying to work on the target accounting, which is done for scope 2. So my message here is we shouldn't just wait until the industry standard is a little bit higher in terms of requirements and we have more difficulties. Yesterday, the colleague from General Motors says there's no way back. They will start to ask us about our goals, our objectives. They will start to ask about the decarbonization so that we can be part of the sales of our products, in this case, General Motors. And they will be requesting that based on the demand, on the claims, on the emission reductions, and these can be even more challenging due to this social demand. So moving is fundamental, and my conclusion is the worst strategy is wait and see. There are companies who are starting to generate equity for these renewables because it's difficult to work on projects because there's not enough supply, but we need to bet on the decarbonization because it's going to make sense in economic terms, and we also need to take some risks. And that would be my last contribution. Thank you. Thank you so much, Javier. And you talked about greenwashing, and it's clear that we have problems in methodologies and some of the burdens that we should work on. And what is the part of our sector in the energy generation sector? What can we do so that we can overcome this problem and we can have a path that is much easier to follow, much easier to walk and to solve? As you can see, I think that it's collaboration. I think that in the utility sector and in the industrial sectors, we are having this conversation in think tanks and NGOs and universities, and they have interactions with the authorities, with the regulators, with the politicians, and we are participating very few as a company, as an industry in these conversations. So sometimes we have consultation papers with some proposals that are very interesting or very weird because we don't know where they come from. But there are universities and panels from the UN where they're analyzing the situation and the industry is not there. So I think that the key word is collaboration. We need to start participating in these conversations and put everything over the table. I know that in the social networks we're always going to have haters, but we need to get to the public opinion. I think the keyword is collaboration. We need to be present in those conversations because sometimes we underestimate them. We say, oh, this is just a university or an NGO talking about this, but they talk to the governments, they talk to the authorities, and I think that's the key. I think this is a work that we need to do. We need to work together. I think the key element is collaboration, correct? Yeah, there needs to be a collaboration, and here we can work in Brazil through the Federation of Industries or the National Confederation of Industries, and this is a way we can use these type of associations so that we can bring this input from the industry, and we can consider when we create the methodologies or when we interact with these mechanisms. Thank you so much for your contribution. And we were talking about the collaboration, about plastic and about Canada and about how they're supporting the steel industry in Latin America. And we have the commitment of the reduction of greenhouse effect gases, and I'm going to ask Eduardo and you to talk about how do you leave this collaboration? How can we all together work in the same path so that the Latin American countries understand that they and we need a support to be successful? I think that there is no other way to do it, because when we see how the organized countries are working, when we see what has happened with European plans, well, I think that we should move or start moving our governments, because otherwise we're not going to have an advantage. But here we have the advantage of having clean energies, but we should not just stop working, because we need the support as a country and as an industry, and we can make our product feasible into the market. So collaboration, joint effort, and we need to start working with or helping our governments realize what we are doing. And this also happens to the Latin American countries because we need to bring the best practices. Javier, would you like to say something? I think that we need to consider the association with different platforms where we have the energy buyers, the generators, the technologists, and in terms of renewables, there is a fundamental part of the market, which is the PPA, which guarantees investments and make projects feasible. And we have the example of the United States, which is a very strong market, and we have Renewable Energy Buyers Alliance, or in Europe we have Arisource, which is another association that gathers them around, and we have another one in Asia Pacific. And this is lobbying and regulatory in connection with the governments, with the policies. This is an alliance, and they work together. And this is an experience that we're missing in Latin America. I think that there are sector associations in the wind sector, in the solar sector, but I think that working together can make a lot of sense. And even with some initiatives, there are some initiatives for carbon credits in Mexico and Chile. I don't know if there is this type of system in Brazil or not with the new government. And I think that there are many regional synergies, and this example is, well, of course, assuming the US as a region, because this is a federal institution, but we need to consider the platforms that are above the local associations. For example, the European Association ARISOS is considering the consumers associations, the turbine manufacturers, panels manufacturers, the wind sector, the solar sector, and this is an intercommunication of every part, and I think that we could explore that. Well, something that I can mention about the structure of PPAs is supporting this creation. And in Latin America, we live a lot of economical and political instability. So here we can see a trend of our industrial sector so that they don't want to create long-term contracts anymore. So that's different from what happens in the United States. We have very low maturity in the PPA markets in the long term, and also with financing and with the growth of the supply. But I think this is changing now. I've seen that these changes are already happening in Mexico, in Brazil, and Chile, and this is because of the change of the mindset, because the market is understanding and it's learning that to have a better treatment, it's worth having these type of contracts because this is going to mean more stability for their businesses. And also about the availability of costs, even for this year, next year, we're going to see a change in the prices depending on the availability. Also in the industrial part, and this is going to happen in the future. How we're going to compete? I think that we should also need to consider instability in Latin America, but somehow this is changing in every country. Thank you so much again for your participation. Thank you for your presence, for your contributions, and a big round of applause for them.